Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Strife's Talking Points, where I try and make sense out of the world and try and have a conversation with you all. Today, we have a heartbreaking story. I mean, this is just one of the most awful things I've seen, where a father and a toddler drowned in the Rio Grande trying to cross the border into the U.S. The story initiated out of La Jornada, a Mexican newspaper. Let's scroll up a little bit here. The heart-rending image of a Salvadorian father and his young daughter who drowned crossing the Rio Grande on the way, to the U.S. highlighted the human crisis, human cost, and the humanitarian crisis at the border. I believe with the uptick in recent deaths and all the issues we're having, you can see where this has reached an epic crisis at our southern border. Whether it be I don't even know. It's in no way can this not be considered a massive crisis, a failure of our government, and more so a complete lapse in judgment that our government has had for the last few years, possibly over a decade, of not doing anything about this. And it's as we get closer and closer and the rhetoric goes more and more insane, I believe that we're going to be continually seeing more and more things like this. Martinez Ramirez, this is from Washington Examiner, was reportedly frustrated because his Salvadorian family was unable to immediately present themselves to U.S. authorities as they sought asylum. Now, the traditional, the legal, the UN term of asylum means you proceed to the first nation outside of yours that would have you, and you present yourself for asylum. Of course, they crossed through Mexico. They were granted visas there and were basically had moved on to further northern camps right outside of the U.S. to try and present themselves into the U.S. Now, between the Salvadorian desert, which boasts regular temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the fast-moving Rio Grande River, there's a 2,000-mile U.S. border. It's often a fatal crossing between ports of entry, meaning, and there's massive desert, open area, not a lot of anything. It's hot. It's just terrible conditions there, and these people are coming up from much more tropical style places, and they're moving through this desert. And as of now, let's see here, a total of 283 migrant deaths were recorded last year, according to the Associated Press. The total for 2019 has not yet been released. My assumption, as we've seen a massive spike in the number of crossings, there will also be, unfortunately, another spike in the number of deaths. And unfortunately, a lot of these deaths, I believe, are caused from the rhetoric we have in the U.S., where it's open season if you get in, whereas it's becoming more and more difficult to get in. So you're going to see more of these crossings. Now, here we go. Last week, a shelter director noted how long the waits have been for those seeking asylum to meet with U.S. officials and have their cases heard, saying there were only 40 to 45 cases heard per week. In Matamoros. Meanwhile, anywhere from 800 to 1,700 names are on the waiting list. With the greater crackdowns and restrictions, said Chris Ramon, senior immigration policy analysis at the Bipartisan Policy Center think tank in Washington, we could see more desperate measures by people trying to enter the U.S., Mexico, or the U.S. Now, recently, side note to this, of course, you've had the uptick, the push from Mexico to try and limit the people crossing into Mexico illegally and trying to make it to the U.S., which is, the treacherous part there where they're up through the desert. They put 15,000 troops on their southern border to try and halt people from coming in, push those people back, stop the uptick, and they've also granted amnesty in some cases, and they're running their own migrant camps now, trying to assimilate those people into their country instead of having them move towards the U.S. Now, this is from CNN. This is actually from the Salvadoran foreign minister. The deaths of the father and child prompted Salvadorian Foreign Minister Alexandra Hill to beg her countrymen to stay and work with the government as it tries to solve economic issues that may cause many to migrate north. Our country is in mourning. Again, I beg you. To all the families, parents, don't risk your life. Life is worth a lot more, she added. Hill said the government is working with Mexican authorities to repatriate the remains. And of course, the family is going to try and the government is going to try and repatriate the remains. Now, trying to avoid as much of this picture as possible. This is a story on Axios. We're going to skip down here. Why it matters. The searing photo of this sad discovery highlights the peril faced mostly by Central American migrants fleeing violence and poverty and hoping for asylum in the U.S. And then they talk about a Syrian child, which what happened. Ramirez, frustrated because his family from El Salvador was unable to present themselves to U.S. authorities and request asylum, swam across the river on Sunday with his daughter, Valeria. So the issue comes from legal ports of entry where they're only able to get so many people through a day or so many people processed in a day to get them into these facilities that the U.S. runs. They're overrun. They're packed. They can no longer hold the people. We're seeing a failure on the U.S. border side where we just can't handle the amount of people. Now, he said it on the U.S. riverbank. This is the daughter in outside of Brownsville, Texas. They say in Brownsville, but outside of Brownsville. It started back for his wife. But seeing him move away, the girl threw herself in the waters, and then he was able to grab the daughter, but then was swept away in the current. I've seen some pictures of the Rio Grande. Some places it's not a puddle. Some places it's actually a moving river. And unfortunately, both drowned. Now, here's one of the things from the U.S. border now. This is also from Axios. House voted 230 to 195 on Tuesday to approve $4.5 billion in emergency funding bill for humanitarian assistance for migrants and additional security measures at the U.S. border. Now, from what I've been able to read of this, the additional security measures, I couldn't really find much of them from the House putting anything into extra border security. They were mostly concerned, and here, what's new. Democrats made several last-minute changes on Tuesday to the House bill, which now requires Customs and Border Protection to establish new health and safety standards for migrants in its custody within 30 days to create protocols for dealing with migrant surges. Here's the overall picture that I kind of get from this is as we start throwing more money and building more facilities, better facilities, you're going to see the numbers of migrants from South America, Central America continue to increase. Now, these facilities need to be funded. They need to be changed. I believe the current totals where they're housing about 15,000 or 45,000 people, and they have almost none of that capacity. Here's actually from The Guardian. I was going through this. Last month, this CBP, Border Patrol, arrested more people at the U.S. border than any time since 2007. There were 132,000 arrests in May, 11,000 children. At the time of this death, this is the 16-year-old that died of the flu. CBP was detaining 2,500 children, a total about 15,000 migrants, 4 times their capacity. Every report I've seen, everything I've seen on this is the U.S. is far beyond capacity for any types of surge like this. For the last year and a half, 2 years, you've seen nothing but there's no crisis, there's no issue, there's no nothing. You continue to see extreme rhetoric on this where basically most of the Republicans saying we need to clamp down, we need to begin removing those that are here illegally, and the president a few days ago actually announced and then de-announced his plan to actually begin removing the people who had lost their court battles. They had been before court, they were denied asylum because they were not they didn't qualify for it, and they were going to then be removed from the U.S. per the law. Trump completely backed off that, basically passing it back to Congress, saying fix the immigration policies. And what we're seeing now from the government is basically they're throwing money at the border. They are trying to fix the shelters, fix the housing, make them more sanitary. However, these aren't going to happen overnight. I mean, you've got to think, if you're going to build a group of migrant housing or detainees, whatever you want to call them, illegals, whatever, that's going to take months and years to finish these facilities. You can't just throw up, as we see now, these little tent cities, which are immediate, short-term housing. This is becoming a mass issue. If you have 100,000+ people crossing the U.S. border, and you're going to try and house even a quarter of those, I mean, you still at 15,000, we're still 4 times over capacity. And as families find that they can get across easier, or not easier, families find they can get themselves placed in the U.S. much quicker, much simpler by bringing their children over. I believe that you're going to continue to see this. I've been looking into this story. I've covered it a few times over the last month or so. And this is, as you see here, this is from a few days ago. This is from the 20th. So this is only from a week ago. More children may die in the detention of the U.S. government unless Congress passes a $4.6 billion emergency fund for immigration services at the border. Now, this comes after the one facility in Texas. There it is. Yeah, it's actually pictured there in El Paso, where they had 400 children in a place meant to only house 100. This is a unbelievable humanitarian issue that the U.S. is having right now. And I don't see there's any way out of this. The U.S. is going to pass funding, going to try and fix these facilities. And as word spreads south that these facilities are being improved, that there is better and better chance of crossing and getting into the U.S., there's no reason that someone who is poor, who is in one of these Central American countries, is not going to make a break for the U.S. Even with deportations, even with anything else, if they can get in, if they can get to a sanctuary city, state, that's what they're going to do. And again, I don't see how any of this is going to be beneficial in any more than most other, programs, which are just keep putting money into the problem, keep improving things for the people, and then the numbers of people going for that are going to continue to rise. Without some type of border protection, without some type of strict guidelines, everyone is going to make a run from South America to the U.S. Anyone who's even slightly impoverished It's going to move into the U.S. or try at least. And if the only way I believe the U.S. can solve these migrant deaths is to actually move resources into Mexico. U.S. government offices are going to be set up and try and catch people while they're in Mexico and bring them to the U.S. in that manner. Because if you just want to process them, word will get back that, hey, now the U.S. can process, instead of 40 people a day, can process 1,000 people a week or whatnot, that the numbers will continue to rise. And as the numbers continue to rise, the funding must continue to rise. And I don't know where I actually stand on this, because these most of these deaths have been coming, all of people moving in. They're it's just the tide is coming, and I don't see any way that this is going to be made better. Of course, the $4.6 billion in funding will be a short-term stopgap measure until that money is spent and these facilities are bolstered, and then the next wave comes in, unless the Department of unless the Border Patrol has some other type of unlimited funding to deal with these migrant surges. I don't see an end in sight. I don't see that even after we fix these short-term issues that there's going to be a reprieve in this without some very strict security measures. And then, you know, if you do apply for asylum in the U.S. and it's rejected and they are deported, then those people would go back home and say, no, it doesn't work the way you think it will. And then, of course, you would begin to see the fall. But that's just my opinion. And again, this comes after the another death at the border, not just of the, I believe the last few deaths were people who were severely dehydrated, malnourished, their bodies were in shock from being walked through a desert for a number of days, if not weeks. And this is the first, of course, drowning on the river that I've heard of. And those are just my opinions. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys are thinking. This is a very difficult topic. I mean, this is one of the most awful things that I can think of. It's going on right now, even with outcry, with this money being spent. Looking at the history of how spending money works for the U.S. and for these types of facilities and for this kind of an issue, I don't see that money stopping the issue. I see that money slowly but surely ramping it up, because if you only focus on the humanitarian side and not the security side, you're going to continue to have to fund the humanitarian side, because without the security part, or without the blocking of entry, without the forcing them to go to these specific areas where they can be cared for on the Mexican side of the border, I just see this as a continual problem. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you and have a great day.